system, and we do have a Category 1 hurricane, winds at 85 miles an hour, and that pressure 957. You can see that this is a very expansive system. Already that cloud cover getting into the Cape where Jordan is, up into New England as well. That center of circulation really wide, really broad with this. Our watches and warnings have expanded. 3 million are now included in these advisories, and that water rise could be up to 3 feet with the surge and the tide, and that could inundate some spots from Long Island all the way into down East Maine for us. Tropical storm warning still up for Bermuda, where we did have some of those gusty winds. It's now pulling away from Bermuda as it is headed northbound right into New England. And look at our tropical storm force winds. This thing has gotten bigger. Over almost 350 miles are tropical storm force winds, hurricane force winds out over 100 miles. So that's why we keep saying this is going to be impacting and affecting so many people. Right now, you've got that onshore flow here into the Outer Banks. You've got winds gusting over 40 miles an hour. And as Jordan mentioned, this is going to push all the waves northbound eventually. We do have that north wind, Nantucket, Montauk, gusting near 30 miles an hour. Buoys here over 34. And look how far that system is. You're still several hundred miles away from it, and we're already feeling those effects. Wave heights also, they've gone up. Yesterday in the Outer Banks, we were talking about our wave heights around 10 feet. Now we've popped up to 12, even 14 feet, and you can see them propagating up towards Long Island with our wave heights at 9 feet. So things are going to be going downhill as we head really into the evening hours. Tomorrow is the day when we just get smacked with this system. Wave heights in the center of the storm around 40 feet. So as this nears the coast, things are going to grow and grow and grow in the water when we're talking about the waves. So here's a look at our buoys, and you can notice we had those 40-foot waves right in the center, right? So it crossed over the buoy, and we had them up around 30 feet, and then things have calmed down now that it is off to the north. Where are we going to see the winds? When are we going to see the winds? I think overnight tonight they really come in. Tomorrow, you're feeling it, and then as we head into our Sunday, it's out of here. You're actually going to see sunshine from Portland down into Boston for your Sunday. It is a quick mover, and we are very thankful for that. How about that wind forecast showing you it's not all about that center and where it makes landfall, because we could see wind gusts here tomorrow on the Cape, 75 miles an hour, the same into coastal Maine. That's where we'll have the strongest winds. And then the landfall is looking like it's in Canada, but again, still very close here to the U.S. Kelly.
All right.
Edition of America's Morning Headquarters. The Outer Banks are already feeling every little single area, but there's the possibility of up to 3 feet of surge anywhere really from Long Island to down East Maine. That's where we can see that water rise, the tide, and this is above normally dry ground with that water rise. And then you also have the waves kind of crashing on top of that. Don't forget, you get that onshore push. You have to follow the wind direction. That pushes the water. And so we have that onshore flow here in the Outer Banks. We're already seeing that water rise up to a foot here into Hatteras, and Duck is seeing it over a half a foot. So that's why one of the reasons that we have these coastal flood warnings and coastal flood advisories for us. Here's the definition of coastal flooding. That's when you have a temporary inundation of seawater over normally dry land. It can result from the tides, the onshore wind like we were showing you there, and also surge. And these events are actually increasing as we see the change in climate. Like in Miami, you see a lot of that just sunny day flooding happening more and more and higher and higher. We do have those coastal flood warnings down East Maine. Down East Maine, by the way, is just kind of that Bar Harbor area north. It's just that little area is where it's considered down East Maine, technically speaking. Coastal flood advisories extend anywhere from Massachusetts down into Connecticut and into New York as well. Nantucket, you're going to get it good there. And the coastal flood factors, when you're talking about the moon phases, the tides are highest during new and full moons. Strongest effects in place with large tidal swings is the northeast. You see really big changes in your tide there. And guess what? A new moon begins tonight. So that is less than ideal for what we have going on with our system. We're going to go through at least 2 high tide cycles into Montauk, which is that easternmost point of Long Island, but it is moving through quickly. At least it's only 2 high tide cycles and not 4 or 6, because by Sunday, the sun's going to be back out and shining, Lynette.
All right, Steph.
Peak hurricane season is here and activity is bubbling up. throughout really the Atlantic. Look at this. 4 different areas, of course. All eyes are on Hurricane Lee. That's the one that will be affecting us as we head over the next 24 to 36 hours. This is America's Morning Headquarters. Hurricane watches are up for parts of Maine, and tropical storm warnings line the New England coast. We also have Invest 97L. That is one that you should keep an eye on because it could take a similar path to Lee. And by the way, there is a good chance that this will turn into Nigel sooner than later, Lynette.
All right, yeah, we're going to talk about Nigel.
It's the very latest with Hurricane Lee, a Category 1 moving north at 16. So it's gained forward speed. Yesterday morning, it was moving north at 12 miles an hour. It is going to blast through. It basically comes in on Saturday, and then it's out of here by Sunday. We get the sunshine back into places like Portland and Boston. But this thing's massive. Look at the shield of clouds with this. There's your center of circulation. You can see it's still spinning around, but I'll tell you what, we have some intense hurricane force winds. They just really spread out for us, and you can see that. If you go back to Wednesday, hurricane force winds extended out 240 miles from the center. Now, 345 miles from the center. So our wind field is expanding, and that's why it's going to be affecting so many people. About 3 million people now, over 3 million people, are in watches and warnings, and our advisories have expanded here now to include Canada. The rise of water could be up to 3 feet from Long Island up into down East Maine. And of course, you've got the tides that are going to play into this. You've got the waves that are going to be playing into this as well. It's just huge. And by the way, this is going to feel more like a nor'easter than it is an actual hurricane for a lot of us because it's a little bit chilly out there. We'll get to Jordan where he's kind of layered up in 2 jackets. Winds gusting into 40, near 50 miles an hour to our buoy just to the west of the storm. Even as you go up north of there, gusting near 40 miles an hour to some of their buoys here. And then, of course, we have the big waves that are getting kicked up from this, too. Water already is rising into North Carolina with that onshore flow. It's all about the wind direction. So this, by the way, is a north wind. It goes from the north to the south. And so that is a northerly wind. And of course, that pushes the water right over the Outer Banks. And we'll show you that water rise coming up in just a little bit. But it also kicks out the waves. Our wave heights from South Carolina all the way up into really Long Island are 10 to near 15 feet. And this is really what we're going to be dealing with through the day are pretty extreme wave heights for us here. And then this is all going to push into the northeast and bring some of those 40-footers potentially in the center of the storm. Lynette, that's why they're still current advisories from Florida all the way up to Maine.
Exactly. It's going to be dangerous.
You a little cold out there today, Jordan?
It gets to you after a while. Yeah, I mean, it's just that consistent 10 to 15 miles an hour, gusting of 30, and it just, as you know, the wind can get through anything. So that's why I layered up this
And that cold water just offshore there, Jordan, the 50s and 60s, and you're standing right next to it. That wind is blowing right off it, and that's going to give you a chill. Let's have a look at where Lee is now. And you'll have to bundle up as you go over time because it's going to be wet and rainy. I mean, it's going to feel more like a nor'easter at times with this system. It is a Category 1 passing Bermuda. There's the center of circulation, and this is going to snake its way up to New England and also into Canada. But that shield of clouds, that's the other thing. With Jordan not getting any of that sunshine, that makes it a lot colder, too. The clouds extend from Long Island, Connecticut, on into portions of New Hampshire, Maine. We are all seeing that cloud cover. And we also have expanded watches and warnings now into Canada. Over 3 million people are in our watches and warnings for us here. And we also have the threat for surge. There's so many different elements to this system. Water rise could be up to 3 feet from Long Island on into down East Maine. That's something we'll have to look for. Tropical storm warnings still hanging into Bermuda, but those will be dropped as the storm continues to race off to the north at 16 miles an hour. Yesterday it was at 12. Earlier in the day yesterday it was at like 9. And so it is picking up speed. But we showed you the shield of clouds with this. And think about the winds are going to expand out, too. And we have them over 340 miles from the center, the tropical storm force winds, hurricane force winds over 100 miles from the center. So a lot of people are going to be impacted by the winds and also the surf with this. That's going to be a big deal. We have a northerly wind, and you can always tell where you are in relationship to a storm because of your wind direction. And so if you're on the west side and the storm is east of you, you're going to get that northerly wind. And even Hatteras gusting to 25 miles an hour. That's no joke. We're going to have issues with planes tomorrow flying into the northeast. I can guarantee you that. 10 to nearly 15-foot wave heights. from the Carolinas all the way into the Northeast. Those will get higher as our storm pushes closer to the coast, because in the center, our wave heights here are right around 40 feet. And that's been pretty consistent. A buoy here that the storm has passed over. You can see our wave heights there around 30 feet, and now a lot calmer now that the storm is going to the north. But it does propagate the waves out in all direction. It's not like you're fully finished with them. So the orange area are tropical storm force winds. That's 39 miles an hour higher. The red is our hurricane force winds, and this is all going to be going northbound for us. And so as you can see, we are going to see tropical storm force winds that could take out power into portions of New England. That's really going to be happening on Saturday. Kelly, today's your last day to prepare, because Saturday it is going to be getting us good.
Yeah, it's not going to be a good travel.
A lot of erosion, thanks to just a low pressure, not even a named storm, nothing, just a little low coming by that was close and just can eat away and cause the water to come up. Here from Long Island to down East Maine, it's 1 to 3 feet of water rise there. That's the surge. And don't forget, you have the waves crashing over that. You have the rain falling as well. And so there's just going to be a lot of water associated with this system. And then you also have to look at the wind flow. We have a northerly wind. That means the winds go from the north to the south. And that water is up here. Duck now 1.1 feet. Hatteras 1.3. Even Wrightsville, we are seeing a little bit of a water rise as well. So there are coastal flood alerts for that water coming up. And then as the storm actually goes to the north, the winds are going to shift around, and you could get flooding from the south side. So we're not really going to be able to escape it here. And coastal flooding means you're going to have a temporary inundation of seawater over normally dry ground. You get the tides, the onshore winds, the surge, and these events are actually increasing due to our changing climate. Think about Miami and South Florida with all that sunny day flooding that we're seeing more and more of. Coastal advisories stretch into the northeast for obvious reasons, because this is where we will get the closest to the center of circulation. And the thing is our tides and full moons, those really impact the surge levels. And so with those strong tide swings in the northeast and the fact that we have a new moon, that is not helpful to the water rise for us here. All right, looks like Montauk has freaked out a little bit for us. They've already taken off for the weekend, the Montauk tide chart apparently. Nantucket, we're going to go through high tide at 1:54 p.m. and then on Sunday again at 2:17. But by Sunday, this system's going to basically be out of here, and so things will be a lot better for us. But watch out for those rivers to rise on up. We could see them in moderate flood stage as this wind is blowing, up to 50, 60, even 70 miles an hour. And then Saturday will be the absolute worst day, Lynette. Sunday, sunshine's back for a lot of us.
Yeah, I know. High pressure builds.
Peak hurricane season is here, and activity is bubbling up in the Atlantic right now. We are tracking, of course, Hurricane Lee here on America's Morning Headquarters. But hurricane watches are up for parts of Maine, and tropical storm warnings for New England. Invest 97L is another one to keep an eye on. This actually could be Nigel as we head over the next, a day or so. There's a very good chance that will develop. And then there's another area to watch. Behind that, of course, Margot, we don't have to be too concerned about that one here in the U.S. Lynette, though, where all eyes are on Hurricane Lee.
Exactly. Our
8 a.m. advisory, and a little bit before the top of the hour, we do get that sometimes. Hurricane Lee, 85-mile-an-hour winds at Cat 1, still moving north at 16 miles an hour, 460 miles southeast of Nantucket. Just right in this area here. And you see the shield, the cloud shield from this already stretching into the northeast for us here. And it is a wide-reaching system. We have had tropical storm force winds out over 200 miles from the center since Wednesday morning. Now we're nearly 350 miles. Those tropical storm force winds extend from the center. That, of course, could cause power outages and take down some trees. Our advisories have expanded over 3 million now in tropical storm warnings. Also hurricane watch. We've got that over into Canada now. And we're going to see that water rise up to 3 feet from Long Island all the way to down East Maine for us. And this storm is moving so fast that it's going to get in essentially tomorrow, and then it's going to be out of here. The sun will be back shining by our Sunday. Here's a look at some of the gusty winds, 40 near 50 miles an hour there in Hamilton and Bermuda. Still seeing some gusty showers for us. You can see that full rotation around the system. That means a northerly wind on the west side, giving us some breezy conditions. You saw in Jordan, it's a little bit breezy out there, but of course, that's going to get a lot worse. That's kicking up the waves 10 to 15 feet from South Carolina all the way up to the Jersey Shore. 40-foot waves at the core, the center of this. And so we will see the wave heights rise as we go through the day. But this will propagate waves out in all directions, and that's one of the reasons we have rip currents all the way up and down the East Coast for us here. Let's look at the winds. Notice they get a little breezy, but really it's tomorrow when things are going to be at its worst. There's a look at tomorrow morning when you wake up. We're talking 60, 70-mile-an-hour winds from Nantucket all the way up into Bangor. And then, of course, into Canada, it looks like where this is going to come ashore is where we could see some of the worst winds. But don't forget, I do think that Maine is going to get pretty hammered from this as it moves through. Here's a look at the wave forecast as we go through time. Waves are going to be eating away, chewing away, eroding away at the beaches, and that continues as we head into our Saturday. Look at these are those 40-foot waves coming into Canada, and maybe perhaps even some 30-foot waves offshore here from Maine. So it's going to be pretty intense for our Saturday, but then Sunday, hopefully there won't be too much cleanup to do, and you can get out and enjoy the second half of your weekend. Lynette, those heavier showers will also be into Down East Maine. Down East Maine, by the way, is this part of Maine.
All right, thanks, Steph.
Track and how close it can get to us.
Yeah, so let's talk about it. Not only into Chatham, but the rest of the Cape. Posted on my Instagram, Jen was saying yesterday on air, and it's true, describing to someone where you live on the Cape, you go like this, you make a flex, and then you tell people where you live on the Cape. That's how they do it. Just like in Michigan, they use the hand. You say, oh, I live here. This is Detroit. You know, that's how you do it. So that's one that you could definitely do if you're trying to describe where you are on the Cape here, because it does look like someone is flexing their muscle. And Hurricane Lee still flexing its muscles with winds at 85 miles an hour, racing off to the north at 16. There's your center of circulation, but that wind shield's really off to the north already into places like Connecticut and into Maine, where we do have advisories posted now. Over 3 million people in watches and warnings, and those have extended into Canada as well. Our surge could get up to 3 feet. We're talking from Long Island to Down East Maine. Down East Maine, you hear that a lot. It's really this section of Maine right up here. That's where it's considered Down East Maine. Bermuda, we saw some gusty winds this morning under tropical storm warning, but the storm is passing off to its north. Conditions will improve for us and go downhill for us here into the northeast, as Jordan was mentioning. This is a wide-reaching storm. This thing has a massive wingspan. Over 300 miles out from the center, you're feeling tropical storm force winds, hurricane force winds out 100 miles from the center. And it's just going to keep expanding like this as we head through time. That north wind is already giving us some water rises here into the Carolinas. Hatteras gusting to 28, Virginia gusting to 22. This thing's hundreds of miles away from us there. So imagine once it gets closer, even though this is probably going to turn into something extratropical eventually, will it make landfall as a hurricane, a tropical storm, an extratropical system? It doesn't matter. We are still going to have the effects from it no matter what it is technically called. Wave heights 10 to 15 feet from South Carolina to the Jersey Shore for us. Everyone stay out of the water. Not only today, but as we head into tomorrow. The waves take a minute sometimes to die down, so keep that in mind. We're talking 40-footers right here into the center of the storm. And as we look at the buoys, they've been pretty consistent for the last 12 hours. So this is what I was mentioning, that you might think, oh, the storm's already gone by, but sometimes it takes a second for those waves to really disseminate. So here's a look at the tropical storm force winds. This is where we have our winds 39 miles an hour more. Where you have the red, our winds are 58 miles an hour and more. Hurricane force wind is 74 miles an hour or greater, just to let you know. So these are all tropical storm force winds. We'll get them at the Cape there and then into Maine. And then, of course, it's going to blow on out of here by Sunday. We'll get the sunshine back into places like Portland and also into Boston. Let's have a look at the winds real quick and where they will be. Of course, the core is where we have the strongest winds, but still, I mean, wide-reaching effects from this, up to 70, 75 mile-an-hour winds for us. But look how fast this thing accelerates as we head into the weekend. And just real quick, I want to show you, there it is for you on Saturday into the afternoon, 75 mile-an-hour winds potentially, and then we get a lot better, Kelly. Look at that on Sunday. We drop back down into the 20, 30 mile-an-hour range.
We salvage the second half.
Edition of America's Morning Headquarters. The Outer Banks already feeling impacts of road that they have to actually clear out. But it looks like the worst weather will be up here from really Long Island through Maine. This is where we could see our highest water rises. But as Kelly mentioned, that overwash already happening, or that flooding with the water coming up. Duck, we're now at 1.7 feet. Hatteras, 1.5. That north flow is just bringing water southbound over the Outer Banks, so that's why there are coastal flood warnings. And that essentially means you'll have a temporary inundation of seawater over normally dry land. It can be caused from tides, onshore winds, surge, all the above. And we see these frequencies increasing because of the changing climate. We've seen it in South Florida, too. Coastal advisories here into the Northeast for some of that flooding and that overwash. And it doesn't help that tides are highest during new and full moons, and we have a new moon beginning tonight. So that's probably going to exacerbate the situation. We go through a couple high tide cycles here in Montauk. One this evening, which isn't great because that storm's still coming up, could give us that push of water. And then on Saturday, that wind direction is going to change. So maybe you get it from Long Island Sound onto places like Long Island with more of a westerly, northwesterly component. As we head into our Saturday early morning, notice that we have high tide at 1:38 here in Nantucket, and you get that north wind, so that's not great that it's going to continue to blow even Saturday afternoon. High tide with the winds going to be impacting us. We could see minor, river flooding with this as well. Here's a look at the winds coming in. Things go downhill tonight. They are at its worst on Saturday, but this thing just gets out of here, boogies out of here. On our Sunday, the sun will be back, and the winds will die down from south to north. Lynette.
All right, Steph.
Peak hurricane season is here, and activity is bubbling in the Atlantic right now. Of course, here in America's Morning headquarters, all eyes are on Hurricane Lee. Hurricane watches are up for parts of Maine, and tropical storm warnings line the New England coast. Invest 97L right here. You should keep an eye on that because this could be Nigel in the coming days. And then we have another area to watch coming off the Atlantic. Margot, by the way, is not one that we have to worry about here in the U.S. But let's focus in on Lee. Lynette has the latest with it.
All right, Steph.
A rough summer, very wet summer. Lee's impact in Maine will not just be along the coast. Rain and winds will be felt inland. The ground is already saturated, putting trees at risk of falling.
And that's a real concern, especially for the state's apple farmers. There are more than 80 apple farms in the state of Maine. They produce about 1 million bushels of apples every year. Joining us live this morning is Harry Ricker, owner of Ricker Hill Orchards in Turner, Maine. I see you're right in the middle of an orchard right now. Thank you for joining us. Have you been having to do anything different preparing for Lee?
We've been growing apples for a couple.
About what type of winds they can sustain, and also what type of winds the actual apples can sustain before they get ripped off.
Well,
Point about the soil being saturated. How has the summer rain affected the crops so far, and how costly could Lee be coming in?
well,
Lee versus other things like a freeze, or as Kelly mentioned, just the rain. How does it compare? Is this kind of like worst case scenario, or is something more like a freeze worst case scenario for you guys?
well, Mother Nature.
A lot to deal with this year. And I know Sunday Lee will be out of here. It's moving right along, so that's the good news. You've got Maine Apple Sunday, considered the peak of the apple harvest. It's a big day for the state's orchards. So what are you guys going to be doing on Sunday? Tell us about the plans there.
We're hoping for the best for you, Harry Ricker, owner of Ricker Hill Orchard in Maine. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm really hoping for the best for him.
I hope so, too. They've got apple cider donuts, by the way, and a disc golf course right on the orchard. So
sign me up.
All right, remember to stay tuned to the Weather Channel on your smart TV, where you can see the latest coverage of...
We had an 8 a.m. advisory come out showing us that Lee was a Cat 1, 85 miles an hour, moving north at 16, very fast, accelerating. And I will say this, our next advisory is at 11, and we will see if there will be any changes to this hurricane. It's got a massive field of wind and cloud already impacting us, and it has been huge for a while. It's been a big storm. Wednesday, our tropical storm force winds were out 240 miles. Now, look at that, nearly 350 miles. That's how far out from the center our tropical storm force winds are. Now, this could turn into a post-tropical cyclone. It might turn into an extratropical system at a time. Now, is it going to landfall as a tropical storm, a hurricane, or an extratropical system? It won't matter the name. We are still going to feel all the effects from it, no matter what they call this. Now, for it to be post-tropical, no longer has sufficient tropical characteristics. The winds typically blow hurricane strength in a much broader field. We see it already doing that, starting to do that transition. Heavy rain and high winds can also continue with this. Advisories have expanded. They go into Canada. Over 3 million are under watches and warnings. We do have that threat for surge up to 3 feet, really along a big chunk of the coast. And you see this will race through. Basically, things will go downhill tonight. Tomorrow is when we have the worst weather. And then on Sunday, the sunshine is back from Portland to Boston. So go out there and pick those apples. Our buoy showing our winds gusting 30, 40, 45 miles an hour. Hamilton there in Bermuda still gusting in the 40-mile-an-hour range with that onshore flow bringing us that water rise into the Outer Banks. But notice Nantucket already gusting to 38. This thing's like 400 miles from us. So we're already feeling the effects, and just shows you how broad it is. The wave height's 40 feet out in the core, but it is propagating everything out. 10, 15-foot wave heights for us here along the East Coast. And notice those big wave heights right in the center. So as this nears the shore here, it's going to be big time into places like Canada and Maine. And because it's so large, it's giving us waves from Florida all the way to the northeast, and we have rip currents there. The winds, they really start to pick up tonight. We're talking about 60, 70-mile-an-hour winds potentially on all of our coastal areas. Again, Saturday's the day. Sunday, literally, we're going to be back in the sun in the 70s, Lynette. Pretty wild.
It is pretty wild.